This is Cinema Field Guide, a podcast that surveys the breadth and depth of film history, one movement or microgenre at a time. I am Brian Loomis, joined by Felicia Maroney. Felicia, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm
Yeah,
fantastic. How are you?
you've had a sick child this week,
Yeah,
so as good as one can do under the circumstances, I suppose. So,
exactly. There's
yeah.
that. The weather's nicer, at least.
Oh,
I
that
feel
is
the
good.
last time we
Yeah.
spoke, I think we both had rainy weather, but
Yeah.
it's nice and sunny. So
It's
there's
been
that.
good. It's getting really hot here. We got into
Is
the
it? Okay.
90s one of the days, and 90s in Knoxville it's so humid here that it just is like really brutal. So we've been at the pool all the time.
Yeah.
It's been great. We've got like this neighborhood pool that a bunch of the parents of our little elementary school community all have memberships to. So anytime we go there, we see people we know. We hang out there all day. The
Nice.
kids wear themselves out. It's wonderful. So
That's
that's
the ideal.
that's most of our summer plans. Is just we're gonna be at the pool all the time. That and summer camps, Yeah.
I know. I'm excited for the outdoor pools and the beaches to open up around here because definitely will be taking advantage of that. It's
Oh,
also
what time of
very
year?
humid in Toronto.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
What
what
time of
time
year
they
do they open up? Yeah.
um they're probably open, but like in terms of like making sure the water is like
Yeah, the
clean
temperature. Yeah. Oh,
and
okay.
stuff like
Yeah.
that. For the pools, the temperature, but the outdoor beaches, they have to make sure the water sources are clean. Lake Ontario ones absolutely will not swim in, but if you go up to like St. Lawrence River or Lake Simcoe, and this is only for people who know Ontario. All
Yeah.
these places, the water's a little bit better, but you got to make sure that you know there's not some
Yeah.
gunk in there.
I did a triathlon once and swam. This was in Nashville, and I swam in the Cumberland River for like the swim portion of the triathlon, and that
Oh
was some
wow,
pretty nasty water. It was
yeah,
not particularly pleasant, but as long as you don't drink it, But with kids, it's a little different.
I
So,
know. I know. You
yeah.
turn
So,
around and they're like guzzling the water, and I'm like,
yeah. It's like,
this is
no,
not. That
that's
can't
not
taste
good.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, what film are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about Yesterday Girl. This is Alexander Kluge, his very first film. So I'm very excited to talk about this one. If we're talking about like a very quick synopsis of the film before we get into the details, it's about a young German woman who searches for happiness, liberation, and independence in the elusive wake of a transformative national recovery. Starring Alexandra Kluge, the
Yeah.
director's sister, as Anita G.,
Mm-hmm.
who is a
Yeah.
real woman.
A real woman. Yeah. So, yeah, this is his first feature. So let's talk, I guess, a little bit about the background of the film and Alexander Kluge's background. Who was he and why is he important to the movement?
He was one of the first members to begin the new German cinema, which is why we're is to talk
Hmm.
about film history. And he is one of the first people to sign the Oberhausen Manifesto. And this from there it launched the New German Cinema movement. And we talked about this in our initial intro episode about the history, but will reiterate for people how this came about. But essentially, there was a lot of directors who were making short films, and a lot of artists wanted to have the funds and the means to be able to make feature-length films because of where Germany was. They were in a period of time where they kind of wanted to move past their history and not really acknowledge it at all, which came about with the Heimat films, where it was anything but acknowledging what Germany had just gone through and what they had done to many other countries.
Mhm.
And so the directors of this movement, which includes Kluge, Fassbinder, Wenders, Herzog, and many other directors that we'll cover, they came together to say that we would like to create a new cinematic language in Germany and bring things into light, but also just create something that's not just trying to emulate what America's doing and just
Mhm.
create a new style of filmmaking.
So
Mhm.
I actually grabbed the whole text of the Oberhausen
Nice.
Manifesto because it's short enough that and it's so interesting, the way they frame what they mean to accomplish. To me, Kluge feels like sort of the instigator of this manifesto. He's had a short film premiere at Oberhausen the previous year, and they get a bunch of people together, short film directors. And he's one of the first people. This is the very first film that is funded from the funding
Mhm.
that results from Oberhausen. So he's very instrumental as sort of an individual that led to the launch of the funding, which really was the enablement of New German cinema. So the Oberhausen Manifesto, let's just read it real quick. So the manifesto says the collapse of conventional German film has finally removed the economic basis for a mentality that we reject. This gives the new kind of film a chance to come to life. German short films by young filmmakers, directors, and producers have, in recent years, received a large number of prizes at international festivals and gained the recognition of international critics. These works and their successes show that the future of German film lies with those who have proven that they speak a new film language. In Germany, just as in other countries, short film has become a school and place of experiment for feature film. We declare our right to create the new German feature film. This new film needs new freedoms. Freedoms from the conventions of the established industry, freedom from the outside influence of commercial partners, freedom from control by special interest groups. We have concrete intellectual, formal, and economic ideas regarding the production of the new German film. Together, we are prepared to take economic risks. The old film is dead. We believe in the new one. And that last bit there sort of becomes the rallying cry of the old film is dead, Papa's cinema is dead,
Mhm.
is sort of the rallying cry of Oberhausen and that group of short film directors who want to make their own sort of stuff. I think especially what sticks out to me in regards to what I know about New German cinema from the Oberhausen Manifesto is their the language about commercial film and like we've shown that they're basically saying that this previous generation of filmmakers who are trying to make work that is commercially viable, it's not making money and nobody's happy artistically, and so we want to make films that are not influenced by commercial viability, that represent the future of German film, this new film language that has more artistic merit than perhaps commercial merit. At least at first, they say they're prepared to take economic risks, but they're definitely setting themselves up for this should be funded by outside sources because it might not they're already setting themselves up for we want to work outside this sort of capitalist system of you get funding from outside investors and they exert a lot of influence on a film to make sure that it makes money on the back end. So that's
Yeah.
what sticks out to me. Anything stick out to you, Felicia, about this?
I think what sticks out to me especially is, and it's not directly written in this, but is for sure, and this will come up throughout the series with specific directors, not all of them, but the influence of them being inspired by definitely the French New Wave and their way of creating films, but also what sticks out to me is kind of where it ended after this, and the fact that as someone who went to film school, we weren't really taught about New German cinema. And, every time I read this manifesto, I feel personally inspired I was like, maybe I should make my own film, even though it's not, film has always been my interest, but more of the history side.
Hmm.
But I feel like, you know what, let's go out and just do something. And I really wish that more young filmmakers would read this manifesto and take inspiration, because I think it's very inspirational to be like, there should be funding for arts,
Hmm.
just point blank, and you should be able to fund people who want to create innovative stories as opposed to copying what other countries and cultures are doing, because it doesn't translate necessarily as well if you go from like America to Germany. Only someone like a Fassbender was able to do it, but even how he did it was very different than how someone was doing it in the States. So I think it's a very inspirational manifesto, and I think more people should be writing their own manifestos and taking things into their own hands. It's a scary time for filmmaking and art right now, and it feels like people are starting to get complacent, and I hope that this is not the case and there's a bit of a revolution and just taking
Yeah.
things into their own hands.
I've also, going through all of this research on New German cinema, thinking about film movements over time. To some extent, film movements are named as film movements after the fact. And so we
Yeah,
sort of reconstruct based on what's happened. But if I had to think today about like, are there any film movements that are active and thriving? Like, it's really dicey. Maybe
I
you'd
know.
say South Korea has
Yeah.
a pretty good film movement ongoing, but that's, been going on for 20 years. So
Hmm.
is there a new thing that's launched that's going to turn into a film movement that has its own identity? And I don't know, and you don't necessarily need that to have good films, but I look at what's coming out in the festivals and such, and it seems very, I mean, it's art house stuff. Some of it is quite
Hmm.
good, but I don't know that it's innovative in the same way as a lot of this stuff was. So we do need voices like this who are saying, we want to give a new kind of film the chance to come to life for film to survive long term. Like there needs to be innovation, new things happening. We can't just repeat what has been done in the past. So there, I mean, there are different types of stories being told today that are very
Yeah.
exciting. And so I think that's where, you've got new queer cinema starting in like the 90s
Hmm.
or so, but trans directors getting the chance to make films like that has not happened until,
No.
the past 10, 15 years perhaps that I'm super aware of at least. I mean, you've got the Wachowskis, but they're established before they come out as trans.
Yes.
So a little bit different there. So I think those sorts of things are very exciting, and like that to me feels like the future of film and where the new film movements are going to be. So that's the most exciting to me. So on a more optimistic note, film
Exactly.
movements are dead. There's no innovation. Yeah,
There you go. I
yeah.
really hope that they follow in the footsteps, and I think there definitely is hope. I don't think it's hopeless at
Hmm.
all, and I think that it's oddly enough, I do wanna just say that Kluge was actually a lawyer before he became a
Yeah.
filmmaker, and I think, his knowledge of being able to engage with other human beings is how he's not the only person who wrote this manifesto, but he definitely had a heavy hand in this, and I think that's
Yes.
why it's so gripping, and it was able to achieve what they were able to achieve from this. So
Yeah.
you can do anything. You can be anything, and then you can make a film.
Absolutely. He was a lawyer. He's also a writer. He writes
Uh-huh.
extensively about film, social criticism. He is really insightful in the way he writes. I find, and we'll get into this with the film itself as well, but I find that he is more of a uh, theorist and
Hmm.
has really compelling and neat ideas about film. And I don't always feel that he's able to capture the ineffable and artistic in his films. It seems very derived from his way of thinking and logical in a way that, like, when I read what he writes, it's like, wow, this guy has great ideas about what films can be. And you can see how it led to the films that he created. But there is something about great filmmaking that can't be captured simply with
Hmm.
words.
Yeah.
And, we write film criticism, we talk about films, but that ineffable quality beyond just what can be said about a film is very important to the quality of that film. And I feel like sometimes that's a little missing in Kluge's work, but wondering how you feel about him as a director overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think I like the idea of him more than necessarily his work. And I do, it's interesting because I did enjoy this film, but I think what I enjoyed even more was the research on the film,
Hmm.
more so than the film itself, because the film, and again, we'll get into this for sure, but the film demands a lot of its audience because of the way it's cut, because the way it's structured. And if you're only watching this for the once, you're probably gonna feel a little bit confused. Like, why did he make these choices and what really happened in this film? But I think it requires definitely more than one watch. And I think, again, I can understand where he's coming from, where he has these great big ideas and he wants to transport them to film in an interesting way. It's just a little bit more difficult to digest, especially on a first watch, more so than maybe a lot of the other films we're gonna cover in this series, I think. I think it's
Yeah.
probably the most, cut up versus the other ones that are more linear.
Yeah.
So,
At first, I thought, and I think I even read somewhere that it is sort of told out of order. Watching it
mhm,
again and giving it a more careful watch, I wasn't quite sure on that. It does seem to be told in a linear fashion, though some things sort of recur
mhm,
in interesting ways of like the past repeating itself.
yes.
So there's some aspects of that, but it does feel as you're watching it a little bit choppy. And I think that's intentional.
Yeah. So there's a great article on Senses of Cinema, which will be linked for sure in the show notes and highly recommend for anyone who's interested to read it because they have a lot of information on in that article about his career and not necessarily just about this film, but what he was interested in, how his style of filmmaking came about. But they talk about his theory of montage, and they say Kluge has sought out to theorize and put into practice a new conception of montage, distinct from both invisible editing strategies of Hollywood and commercial film practice, and dialectical montage as theorized and practiced by Sergei Eisenstein and the Soviet School of Filmmakers. So, if you're familiar at all with Eisenstein, and how he did montage. You can see that for sure that he was influenced by his work. And I've read some other interviews with him because Kluge passed away this year. Is it this year
Yeah.
or? Yeah,
this
this
year.
year. So,
Yep.
and he was actively still talking to a lot of publications who were anyone who was interested in talking about his work or German cinema or cinema in general. And he says that he was definitely inspired by Eisenstein, but he was even more inspired by Godard and his style of editing, which I think, if you're familiar with a specific era of Godard and how he would like to, like his stories are linear, but kind of like what you were saying, sometimes things are intercut where it makes you feel like it's not linear. But what Kluge was saying was that the way I create a montage or editing style is that I want to have the audience be a active participant. So they need to think about and they need to fill in blanks. And sometimes you see a scene and you see another scene, you're like, what do they have to do with one another? Because then it cuts back to another scene. And you're left to just think about what they had to do with one another. And it's all relevant and it all makes sense, but it definitely d requires you to be actively watching the film. This is not a film that you can just have on in the background and be doing something else at the same
Hmm.
time, because you will miss a lot, and it's a short film. It's a shorter film. So, I think you could definitely give it all the attention it requires, and it deserves, because I think it's a very interesting film.
Yeah, absolutely. The influence of French New Wave on Kluge in general, and this film especially, is
Mhm,
so striking. If this film was, set in France and dealing with French economic conditions, you would not blink an eye watching this as a part of the French New Wave, and particularly that influence of Godard is so
mhm,
striking on what Kluge is trying to do. And so I think, thinking about Kluge as just a theorist, like there are things he's doing stylistically here that are non-didactic. And that's an
mhm,
issue that I have with the film, is that it's trying too hard to make its point in some ways. But I there is real artistry beyond just that you can see in that's very inspired by Godard and French New Wave filmmaking. Vivre sa vie is a
mhm.
very similar film to this. So thinking
Yeah.
about like the episodic nature of that, looking at the way women are treated, it's just so similar in what he's trying to do. So, yeah, there's definitely that direct inspiration. But also, he's inspired by a lot of the people that the French New Wave were inspired by, and even worked with Fritz Lang for a
Mhm.
short period. I didn't know before doing the research that Lang actually went back to Germany to make a film.
Very briefly, he did, and this is part of, like, 2 films that he did that were both set he went back to Germany, but both these films are set in India. So, because as one does, and, at that point in Fritz Lang's career, he'd been working since, the silent era, had his stint in America where really he made his name for himself, like, worldwide. And then towards the end of his career, he goes back to Germany and he does a couple of these films, but the one that Kluge worked for him as an assistant was on The Tiger of Eschpiner. This is one that it's one of the last ones I still haven't seen of his. And it's just been
Mm,
sitting there for me to watch. And anyone I've talked to is like, watch it if you're a line completist, but don't expect anything that's not gonna be slightly problematic. So, I will eventually watch it, but I think for at least Kluge, who we both know is a huge film nerd, I think being able to work with Fritz Lang, in any capacity, even if he wasn't doing technical work, he was his assistant, I think definitely meant the world to him, and probably learned so much from just watching him direct, and I think that's why You can see he's a very capable director with this film, even if the style is like so opposite to anything that Fritz Lang would ever do. Fritz Lang would never make something like this. I don't think
Hmm.
his mind works that way, but I'm sure being able to watch like a master uh, work, especially even later in their career, because at this rate, Fritz Lang has like maybe one or two other ones. He goes back to
Hmm.
America to finish off his career, but I think that that was probably fantastic. I mean, I would have been like, "This is the best day, best few months of my life."
Yeah, just being able to work with him. And then Lang also shows up, to bring it back to Godard. He shows up in Contempt too
There you go.
as himself. So,
Hmm.
yeah, he's definitely inspirational to the French New Wave. And if I was trying to launch a new kind of film in Germany, I would certainly look back to that sort of Germanist expressionist and those era of
Hmm.
filmmakers of there was a great film being made in Germany in the 20s, and so being able to work with Fritz Lang is just sort of a dream opportunity for somebody who's trying to restore the country to cinematic excellence in some ways. So it's really neat
There you go.
that that happened. Yeah, and like you said, like stylistically very different, but just being able to see a master at work, I'm sure had an influence.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I will
Cool.
say the last thing on the French
Yes.
New Wave. I mean, not the last thing because I'm
Yeah.
sure it'll come up, but even the way he styles his sister in this film is very Anna Karina. They have the same
Yeah.
hair, same look. To the point where I actually, when I first saw just the images from it, I thought maybe it could be her. So a lot of Godard
Hmm.
influence for sure.
Yes. I will say one key difference is that it's his sister, and I think the casting of
Yeah.
his sister is so interesting. And
Yep.
so, Alexandra does not come off as, I mean, there are sex scenes here. She is naked in the bath for a bit. The camera almost feels afraid of her when she's naked in the back.
Yes.
So you can feel the influence of like, this is my sister, I mean,
Yeah.
no, so I think it brings a really interesting and unique dynamic to this film versus those Godard films where she is not sexualized at all, but there's
Hmm.
this sort of fraternal empathy
Yes.
in the way she is filmed and portrayed here that I think is really interesting and unique. So I enjoy that. Though, yeah, I will say it is very influenced by those Godard films, clearly, but not quite as sexualized, maybe, as
No.
Godard
I mean,
makes
thankfully,
Karina.
because that
Yeah.
would be a little bit odd.
It would be, yeah. So we're grateful for that. We're grateful.
Yeah.
So, how would you say this film is important to the new German cinema movement and genre? Like, when this film is released, what does it do for launching this movement?
Well, as we mentioned, it was the very first to get the funding post the Oberhausen manifesto, so that's important in it of itself, being the jumping start point from it. And because of the way he created this film, it does start off a new way of creating visuals and style for film that just wasn't seen in Germany, especially not since, as we mentioned, like the 20s, where they were doing something very new and specific. Germany was in a point where they were just trying to make the most inoffensive and like easy watching style of films. And here he does create a new cinematic language. Yes, it's inspired by a lot of other people, but he does it in his own way. It won the Silver Lion at Venice, which is a huge award, and it really just brings a lot of validation to the movement. Not that they were looking for awards or money, as you mentioned, but getting an award is always a good thing. You know, it
Hmm.
gets more people to acknowledge the film outside of the festival and outside of the country. And it's not a film that's widely spoken about today, but I still see, even in the research, I saw a lot of art house theaters and cinemas around North America and Europe who were actively still showing this film and stating it as being like, an incredibly important film to jumpstart the movement. So I think as much as it's him and this film are not as much spoken about, but people who are into the movement can recognize its importance for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The winning an award, I mean, if you are going to say, my film is going to have artistic merit over economic merit,
Mhm.
the external indicator of artistic merit really has to be, an award. It could, the director can say, I made a great film all day long. You can point to maybe contemporaneous critical response as well. But winning an award is such a prominent recognition of artistic merit that for it really serves as an early validation for this movement and the artistry of this group of short film directors who's now seeking to make feature films. That this project is working. The very first film wins a prominent award at one of the biggest film festivals around, and it's an award for the direction of the film.
Mhm.
So it's saying this director did a great job. And then he actually wins the Golden Lion, the biggest prize at Venice the following year for Artists Under the Big Top Perplexed. So he gets that early recognition for the movement and becomes a prominent voice that allows this funding to continue to be a thing because it's the very first wave of funding here. And it's early validation to the ones providing the funding that there is something artistically compelling happening here that's being recognized.
Yeah, I think, any country trying something new and getting recognition like that is important, and it's again why a movement that people still talk about. And I can't think of any more recent. I'm very bad at keeping up with Venice and past
Hmm.
winners because I think, did Venice just happen?
No, it's happening in a couple of months. Cannes just
Oh, okay.
happened.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And
Because I was like, I don't know
Venice,
who won.
you know, uh, Pedro Almodovar, obviously a great director, but he won for The
Mm-hmm.
Room Next Door a couple of years ago, which is a
Mm.
terrible film. So, of course, these awards do not always go to the
Tell me
best
about it.
film.
I know.
Uh,
We see that at TIFF here a lot.
yes,
A lot.
yes. So, yeah, the audience award and
Oh,
such goes
gosh.
to more of like a crowd, just the crowd pleaser, the thing that makes people feel good. And all award shows, I think, have that problem to some
Mm-hmm.
extent, but I think it can be a historical indicator of something that's happening. Um,
Yes.
so what about like the hallmarks of this film or its style are influential? So we've got this montage style that's not quite Hollywood, it's not quite um Eisenstein. Do you see a lot of influence from this film on the future directors in New German cinema?
It's odd because I don't see a ton, at least of the
Me
ones that we're
neither.
covering,
Yeah.
and I see that he kind of continues to do that, but even like the other film of his that I watched, Big Mess, is not as it's not stylistically similar like this one. So it's interesting that people weren't more inspired by it. I think they were more inspired by the themes as opposed to the style, because I think
Hmm.
the way he tackles, the East and West Germany and coming together, that's essentially what the film is about a woman who's from East Germany coming to West Germany and the difficulties that she faces. And I think the themes of him putting that out there and out in the open when a lot of films from Germany were just not even acknowledging this past at all. And it's interesting because she also doesn't really want to talk about the past. And you get why, 'cause she's just like, I want to move on. I want to create a new life for myself, a new persona, basically. And I think it follows a lot of what the manifesto was talking about, of like, we need to acknowledge what happened and how we're moving on, as opposed to just pretending to move on and not acknowledging it. And some films are more overt than others that we'll cover for sure, but I think this one is an interesting way how he's tackling it, because he's not getting into the depths of, what happened, but it's there. It's there within how the people interact with one another, and it's there in their mindset, and you could feel it even with the choppiness of how the story is told. You can feel that it's just there lingering, which is, I think, something that inspired a lot of other directors. It's like the lingering of the evils of the past and how the new generation who wasn't necessarily there for it can reckon with that and create their own work and move on from that. So I think
Hmm.
that's, to me at least, is what inspired other filmmakers from the movement. But I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I don't see a whole lot of influence on the other new German cinema directors. I think they mostly take their inspiration from other sources. Maybe you could say there's a little bit of influence on Wenders. He seems the
Mm,
most similar stylistically in what he is trying to do, but not so much like you said, like other directors follow the content. He maybe would be the closest stylistically, but not so much on
yeah.
the content side of things to what's happening here. But yeah, the economic miracle is ongoing in Germany at this time. So even though the film industry in Germany is not doing particularly well, other industries really are. Manufacturing, automotive manufacturing in particular, German cars are huge at this time. The Volkswagen Beetle is sort of this iconic image of German industry and
Hmm.
commercialism. The economy is really thriving, inflation is low, people are getting employed, and this film is a little bit of a counterpoint to that, of saying this thriving of industry is working for some people, but not all people, and showing how people can get left behind even when all of the economic indicators of, okay, what is our unemployment rate and how is inflation and all of this stuff looks good, but there are still people who are being left behind, and not everything can be reduced to a statistic. There are actual people whose stories need to be told to understand what is happening here. So I find that really compelling of an idea.
Hmm.
And this is, there are other films that cover the East Germany, West Germany divide. There are other films that talk about the economic miracle to some extent. I feel like it's not quite as well covered in New German cinema as maybe some other topics. So I like that this one is trying to tackle that and look at that from sort of a critical lens. But
Hmm.
they are themes that will recur in the future, certainly.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the film itself. I think that the first thing that I wanted to talk about was Alexandra Kluge's performance. What did you think of this performance?
I really liked her in this. I mean, this is the first time I'm ever seeing her in anything, and I think what she does with the role is very interesting because she kind of comes across as a bit meek and shy and an introvert, but there is a bubbling rage within her because she keeps getting thrown around from person to person, and she's just not able to succeed in any sort of way. And as you're watching her, because at least to me, I really gravitated towards her and I liked her and I was rooting for her. I'm thinking about why are these people being so mean to her? There's no real reason other than that's just how society was, and that sometimes people get the short end of the stick. And I think she portrays it really well. And I wonder how it was like for her to work with her brother. And I think because they're siblings and they must be close if they, he cast his sister, there's that trust that you can feel with him being able to, allow her to explore her feelings in specific ways that I think the film in someone else's hands would have been sometimes a director might have been harsher towards her character. And I think there's a softness that I can feel from his side that he lends to her. And then it radiates through her performance. I think she's very good. And I'd like to watch more of her work. I know she didn't do a, a ton, but I think she does a great job. What did you think?
Yeah, I think she is wonderful. You'd certainly characterize her as a non professional actor. She worked with really exclusively her brother on film. She was a doctor for her primary career, but she did recur, and so seems like whenever he wanted her to show up in a film, she'd go along and
Hmm.
give a performance, but very naturalistic style. I think her personality jumps off the page, but being a doctor herself, she is putting herself in the shoes of someone who's maybe more, lower class coming from East Germany and really struggling, where from what I can see, she was probably not struggling in the same way in terms of her career or such, but she I think is fantastic. She has these little like micro expressions on her face at times that are just like, wow,
Mm,
you can like really see the personality. And I think that's where the non-professional actors can really shine and just like showing their personality where there's not a
yes.
lot of artifice there, and you can just see like this is the way that a person would act. I actually watched a film recently from other new German cinema directors sort of being shown. So the film is called Where Does Your Hidden Smile Lie? It's a
Okay.
documentary about Jean-Marie Straub and Danielle Houilet as they are
Mm,
editing the film Cecilia, which they made in the late 90s, early 2000s. So this is far after the movement, but they maintained the same style from the time that they were working in New German cinema to afterwards. They also very much prefer non-professional actors, and you're watching them as they're editing the film, which is such a fascinating time
mm,
because they're arguing over like, what frame do we start on? Do we start 5 frames later? And they care so much about all of these details that you would never think of. One of the things they say about non-professional actors, they've got a young actor who's the lead in the film, and they're commenting about how he takes a sip of water as if he is sleepwalking, and that's exactly what they want. They're
oh,
looking
wow.
for the way he would take a sip of water as if nobody was watching. And it is really hard with professional actors to capture that from their perspective, at least, the being able to do unconscious movements as if nobody is watching. And I think that reminded me of this film and some of the ways that Alexandra Kluge moves, makes expressions, just inhabits this person is very naturalistic and just as if she's walking around. And so for a non-professional, I think, obviously for a professional who's been trained to perform in a certain way, that would be hard to capture. I think it'd also be hard for a non-professional, though, as well, to because you're conscious of being filmed, and that by nature of the camera being on you changes things. It changes how you act and behave. And so being able to get into that space where you're just being entirely naturalistic as if you are not being watched, I think can be hard. And I think she does a great job of it in this film.
Yeah, I agree, and it's interesting because I think the way with the late 60s and 70s in cinema around the world, we see it even in American film and, the new American film that we get, and the more often use of non-actors. It's like what you said. I think there's both sides of it. Like a professional actor is going to be a little bit more controlled and they thought deeply
Hmm.
about every move that their actor that they're going to make for their character. And a non-professional, if you pick someone up off the street to be in your movie, they're gonna be like, well, there's a camera. I'm a little bit more self-conscious. So there's like a mix. And you even see it in like DeSica when he used a lot of non-actors in his work and a lot of kids. And sometimes I think it also comes down to the director and how they're able to make someone comfortable because someone like Kluge obviously was very good at directing actors, and someone like DeSica who's picking well, I was gonna say he's picking kids off the street. That's actually sounds really bad. But he's choosing children that he's meeting to be in his films, and they give you some of cinema's greatest performances, and they've never been in a
Hmm.
film before that, and some of them were never in a film after that. So I think them being siblings, the two Kluges, Alexander and Alexandra, which is also very interesting,
Yeah, what were their
what
parents
their
thinking,
parents thinking. They're like, listen, we've got one name and we're doing this.
We're
There's
running it
obviously a
back.
bond.
Same name but female.
I feel like it was like they thought they were having maybe a girl at first, and they were like, well, they were attached to this name, so they gave Alexander, and they're like, well, now we get to use Alexandra. I don't
Yeah,
know if
could be.
that's what they
Yeah.
thought. You can definitely feel the bond between them, and if you ever read any interviews with him and him talking about his sister, he's definitely he admires her a lot. And also their parents have two kids who were one was a lawyer and one's a doctor. I think that's what especially I'm sure at that time was everyone's dream. One goes on to
Hmm.
create films and whatnot, but he's still successful in his own right. But yeah, there's definitely a bond.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that sibling dynamic to making the film, I think is just pretty unique, and they're collaborating in a unique way that I think works to the film's benefit. And so that is an aspect of this film that I find really notable, and it's worth watching just for that, to see how
Mhm.
would somebody direct their sibling and portray it. It brings such an interesting tension to this story that really is focused on generating empathy and sympathy for this characters. There are lots of films that are trying to generate empathy and sympathy for their main character, but the sibling dynamic entering into that makes it so unique in a way that I really respond to.
Yes, I agree. I also will say, not to harp on it, but I think obviously it's great that they had a great relationship prior to this because other siblings directing one another sometimes. I think about if I had to direct my sister or my siblings, we'd be fighting.
Yeah, you know,
Who's to say
sometimes
there
it
wasn't
doesn't
fights,
work.
but yeah,
Yeah. I acted in a lot of home movies growing up that my
nice.
brother sort of took on the director and editor role for our little home movies that we would make, and
Uh,
me and some friends were the actors in these films. And so I'm very familiar with that sibling dynamic and how it can go well and in some cases not go well. Of there's definitely footage of him just getting really frustrated with me trying to do something a certain way, or like cracking up laughing at a scene that's supposed to be serious or whatever it is. So yeah, it can bring an interesting dynamic to a film set, though. Can't say that my experience making home movies as like a middle schooler and high schooler is indicative of what this would be like in a more professional setting with funding and such, but definitely familiar with that dynamic to some degree.
there you go.
So, how do you think the film navigates these different systems in Germany at the time of the economic miracle?
It's interesting because we haven't fully mentioned yet that Anita G is a Jewish woman living originally on the east side of Germany, just coming over to the west, as we mentioned, for and what's in her mind is a better life, especially economically. And she keeps getting into trouble because at some point, if you need money, you need sources to eat, you might be pushed to a point where you commit a crime, even if it's a petty crime like stealing food from someplace. But every person in power that she comes across, because we see her interact with like landlords in terms of like paying rent and renting a place, bosses where she's working and losing her jobs, even professors where she's at, and judges. She's interacting with a lot of people in power who should be there, I think, in her mind, are able to help her, but there's like a ruthlessness to how she's being treated by all these people who are just kind of pushing her around and see her kind of as a problem and a nuisance. I don't know how you feel about how these people are treating her.
Yeah, I get the sense of there being very patronizing. I think in some ways she, in order to survive in a system that she doesn't fully understand, she is just sort of nodding along and they just sort of go with that. I think particularly that scene with the professor where he's talking about what she's going to study, and he's just sort of doing all of the, okay, you're going to study this particular thing, and have you read this person and this person? No. Okay, well, we'll get you to read that. And it's very patronizing, and she clearly has no idea what he's talking about, but he doesn't, there's no empathy there. It's just,
No.
okay, this person is not on my intellectual level, so I just want to, get them out of here, basically. The early scene with the judge, where he is many times he is like, oh, you're just lying about that, or oh, that's not, there's no factual basis for that, is very unempathetic and rigid. I think the systematic nature of going through all of these different systems and showing the various ways in which they would fail someone like this is compelling, at least as an idea. And then
Yeah.
in practice, I don't know that it works quite as well because of that didacticism of their, it's really trying to hammer its message across, and I wish it would just like chill a little bit and be a movie. But
Yes.
yeah.
No, I agree. It does feel for sure heavy-handed, and I get it. Like I try. I'm trying to give him a bit more grace because it's his first film, and
Yeah.
I think I would probably do the same if for some reason I was inspired by a message where it's like you've been thinking about this for years and you pour it all out into one
Yeah.
film as opposed to like, hey, let's take pieces of this and then we can explore it through multiple films. He threw it, he essentially trauma dumped into the whole movie. And it sometimes it works, sometimes it feels like it's a bit much, and there are times where it feels like a bit much when you're watching these people just kind of pontificate on her
Yep.
and just as she's sitting there, just taking it in, and it feels like, what did she really do at all to deserve any of this? And the answer is that she did nothing to deserve any of it, and I'm sure, obviously, this was, something that the real Anita G went through. He does say that it's not, a direct retelling of her story. He definitely had his own, stylistic flourishes to it, but he took the essence of her character and put her into a story that he wanted to tell. I don't really know that much about her as a
Mhm.
person, but I know that he did say that this is me creating my own story and using her as inspiration for what I wanted to tell. And you can tell he definitely had something to say,
Yep.
even if sometimes it's a bit much. Which I
Yeah.
feel like Godard is also exactly the same way, where you're like, okay, let's relax
At
a little bit.
times, yeah.
Yes,
The difference with
depends.
Godard is the volume of films he's making. So
Yes,
even if like 3 out of 4 of them are like, "I get what you were going for, but this didn't really work for me," because he's making so many, he
I know.
does sometimes stumble into, because of how brilliant he was, like a masterpiece. So, yeah, when you're making like 3 films a year, you can have a lot of duds.
Yep.
But the I think it does. I'm not all that down on this film because I do think that the message is a strong one. And so I'm
Hmm.
willing to meet it a little bit more halfway because I do think he has a point with some of this. And so I'm more willing to engage with a film that feels like a written persuasive essay if the written persuasive essay is strong. And so I think it does work to some extent, even though I feel like it's going a little too hard on its points and not enough on its artistry. Though it does have times where it is removing itself from telling the story and just doing these stylistic flourishes. So maybe we go there next of the style of the films. There are these interludes, a lot of close-ups of people and faces. How do you think the style contributes to the film?
For me, what was most interesting was like kind of inter interjecting imagery that felt like it was kind of out of nowhere and allowing you to piece together why that was put there, and the use of sometimes you see the characters speaking, but we're not hearing their dialogue, we're hearing a narration. So it's like, okay, once I settled into it, I was able to understand a little bit better what he was going for, but it's a bit of sometimes of a sensory overload where you're like, okay, there's a lot of images happening that are not corresponding to the audio, and then now there's audio not corresponding to the images, and they're being interjected. But I think it's kind of just hammers in the idea of creating a new language in film. And as we mentioned, kind of closer up to the top, it is interesting that no one really took this and ran with it. They kind of just
Hmm.
left it as its own artifact. And I don't know, that kind of feels a little bit special on its own right. But I wonder if there's other directors post, German New Wave who were inspired by this that we just are maybe not as aware of, because I can't imagine this film just being in a vacuum. But maybe it was. Maybe it's just like its own thing. And no, everyone was like, he did it.
Mhm.
I don't even want to attempt what he did. I don't know.
Yeah. There probably have been films that were inspired by this, but they probably would be considered more, to a film critic watching them, they would say, oh, that's inspired by French New Wave filmmaking because it
Yes.
is pretty similar stylistically. And the French New Wave is just more prominent and popular than this was. So
Hmm.
I think you'd say to me, the stylistic elements that work are mostly lifted from the French New Wave style. But there are some unique things in here, and I think he does some things that are at least intellectually interesting to me of, oh, that's an interesting choice, even if I don't necessarily feel them in my gut as, wow, this is
Hmm.
really effective. So I think there're some interesting stylistic elements. I think he probably gets better in his next film in terms of style and what he's doing, but that one is a little less seen than this. For a movie that is so focused on empathy, those close ups, the way he really focuses in on mostly her face, but also, her hands at times or different actions being taken, being able to see her up close really helps you identify with her in a way.
Yes, exactly. I think sometimes a close up can make you feel in the same way that a score can sometimes you're like, okay, you're forcing me to feel a certain way. But I think there is a nice balance in this one where I think he's obviously hoping that you empathize with her. But I don't think he's forcing you to. I think it's in the performance, it's in the story, and it's in the fact that you're watching a woman who's just kind of being beaten down by the system. And I think it's something that a lot of us, especially watching it in this day and age in 2026, a lot of us can feel. And even if it might not be super, super relevant to yourselves, you're watching it on a day-to-day basis that we can all empathize with her and what's going on. So good use of
Yeah.
close-ups, I think.
Yeah. And it captures something that somebody like this might not even be fully aware that like this is just their ordinary life that they've experienced since they were born, so it feels very normalized to them. And I think you see that in her performance where it's just like this is just the way things are, and to
Yeah.
us watching it's like this should not be the way things are, and the director is hammering that home. But somebody who's experiencing this in real life, I think, can just sort of they're just trying to get by, and so it's just sort of floating from one thing to the next. At times she gets angry and yells at people and you're like, yeah, go
Yeah.
get it. But a lot of the
Good.
time she's just like silently experiencing or suffering without even being conscious of how bad it's gotten and how things could be better. Well, so why don't you think Anita in the story is able to get traction when, from all external indicators, this is a time of economic prosperity in West Germany?
It was interesting because I was thinking about it, and I don't think I could put into words myself what it was, but I read a pretty good article that I'll read a very quick quote on, and I think that hit it right on the head for me. So this is an article from Swarthmore, and again, it'll be in the show notes, but the writer was saying Anita's existence reminds ordinary, in quotes, Germans of their guilt, so they treat her as if she were invisible, passing her on to be someone else's problem, which I feel like is the unwritten thing in this. Again, we mentioned she's a Jewish woman coming from the east side of Germany, coming over to the west side. And it seems to me that they see a difference right away. For us watching it, we would see zero difference. At least to me, I'm like,
Mhm.
you're all German. I don't see what the difference could possibly be. But obviously, for the people living there at that time, they see a divide in the same way that you would see a divide probably from like people from the East Coast to the West Coast of our respective countries, where you're like, we're all the same, but there is certain differences. I think it's a little bit more intense in this one because, she is going to the West to seek a better life for herself or a life that she wants of her own, I think, and what she
Mhm.
thinks is going to be a better life because she figures she can go there, probably do really well, get a nice apartment, get a nice job, and just live her own life outside of like living with her family. And that's just not happening for her. And there's no real reason other than the system just keeps rejecting her and they don't want her there. And I think that's for you as the viewer and myself what feels the most frustrating because they're like, it's not like other films, like, more modern films where they would be like, "This is a foreigner coming in who's trying to make a new
Mhm.
life for themselves." This is someone who's also German, so you feel frustrated alongside with her of being like, "This should be a walk in the park," and it's really not, and,
Mhm.
she ends up in a detention center at the end. And it feels like a wild ride for how short this movie is and all the things that
Yeah.
she goes through that you're like, "Wow, that's a bummer of an ending for sure."
Yeah, I think there's a discrimination, especially during the time of economic thriving for West Germany, of like, they see capitalism is working for us. We are thriving, we are doing well, we're earning lots of money. And so there's this discrimination towards the other socialist system of that's not for us. And if you come over here, you're not one of us and you don't get to benefit from this system. So I think unconsciously that's certainly happening here. And I think Kluge certainly sees it that way because he starts with the scene with the judge saying, "Oh, okay, so you came over from East Germany, and what was your history? And no, I don't believe that," and like all of this
Mm.
stuff. The way that it's framed from that scene being the opening really gives you an indicator of what he thinks are the factors in her discrimination here.
No, I agree. It's hard. It's hard seeing all these people in power, and I will say, you know what, I don't know if I even caught it myself, but I read someone talking about that scene with the judge and the way the camera is placed and it's looking up at the judge, kind of the way she would have to be
Mhm.
looking up. And it's not like a new trick, but it is
Yeah.
interesting. And I think it works really well for this. I think a lot of the people in power, I think even maybe with the professor is framed a little bit higher and feels very overbearing as they're just kind of yelling at
Mhm.
her. Stuff that you're just
Yeah.
like, "Man, just shut up."
Yeah, absolutely. So she ends up, she gets evicted, she is fired from jobs, and then she ends up essentially in a detention center. How do you feel that this film ends for her? Like, is the ending strong here?
Yeah, it's rough to watch someone that's, like, to that point where you're like, you know, where do you go from there? And it's weird. I don't know if I'm read into this weirdly, but I felt once she got into detention center, she seemed a little bit more at peace and calm. She's like, "Well, there's a roof over my head. I will get fed." And obviously, this situation is not good, but this is a bit more stable right now. And I do hope for her that she manages to create a life for herself out of this, even if it's just going back
Mhm.
to where her family is. But there was something in her performance that to me, I read that she seemed a little less on edge than she was throughout the film because this is like, well, I'm here and there's nothing I can do about it right now, and I'll be taken care of
Yeah.
for however long I'm gonna be there. So, as opposed to being like, "When is my next meal? where am I gonna sleep tonight? Unfortunately, she knows. So there's to me, I read that. I don't know if that was just how I was reading it or if you felt that a bit on how she was when she got there.
Yeah, there's something to a person like this who's just trying to survive, even if the situation is bad, like knowing what, the rules are and what's expected is almost, even though it's a terrible situation, it's better in a way than just
Yeah.
being adrift and not having that definition. I mean, she has an affair with a government official named Pachota. That's a lot of what happens in the last half of the movie. She gets pregnant. We see her give
Mhm.
birth at the very end of the film. Pachota tries to help her in some ways, but there is still that divide of he's married, he's having an affair with her. It's never going to turn into something more than what it is. And
Yeah.
then he ends up essentially abandoning her and his baby at the end. So I think it's just another instance of like, yeah, we are interested in you as a romantic partner, but there's a limit there to the empathy because of the nature of the situation. And so it is an interesting ending. And I think that's the way you need to end a film like this, like showing that there's no, magic bullet for
Mhm.
this person. Things are only going to get worse and ends up being more of a call to action.
Yes. I know. It's weird because I think a lot of the films we're covering, a lot of them probably have bummer endings, but this
Hmm.
one I like exactly. I think it's perfectly how you said it. There is more of a call to action to be like, there's no reason that this should have even happened to her. So, what are we going to do to ensure future generations don't have to deal with these situations? So, sometimes you need a downer ending to get the message across. And I think the ending is the whole film is strong, but I think the that last quarter of the film, if you will, is probably
Hmm.
the strongest, um, in wrapping up the message that he has.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Kluge made some other films. We've seen a handful of them. So,
Mhm.
how do you think? Not as many as we'd seen for Herzog, of course,
No.
but how do you feel that this film fits into his broader filmography? Are there other films that are worth watching as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're getting into his work, I think you should 100% start at the beginning and see that, yeah, he didn't really continue on with the style, but I think it's interesting to see what his intentions were. But he also does Artists Under the Big Top Perplexed, which you mentioned. He's one of the
Hmm.
directors, part of the Germany in Autumn film that includes a multitude of directors from the movement, including someone like Fassbinder. And he also does The Big Mess, which I've seen, which is
Hmm.
interesting. It's like a sci-fi comedy film, which just sounds like something if
The
from even doing
opposite of
research.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't personally work at all for me, but I could see what he was going for. It actually kind of reminded me of Carpenter's Dark Star, but
Oh, interesting.
yeah,
That's a
in that
movie that I
sense.
love, but not
I
one that
also
I really like Dark Star. I think
I
it's so
love
much
Dark
fun.
Star.
Yeah.
People don't love it, but I love it. Dark Star is better
Yeah. All
than
right.
this one,
Yeah.
but it's interesting. But Kluge goes on to, I mean, continue making films. As we mentioned, he only passed away recently this year, but he goes on to be the founder of a television production company called Development Company for Television Program, DCTP, which was known for its late night programs and often screened documentaries, a lot of them that he directed. Because if you have a platform for it, why not screen your own movies? What was interesting to me was that I was reading an interview with him with Mubi, and he was talking about the DCTP, and he was like, "Oh, it's actually online now, and there's live streams, and they have all their magazine materials and a lot of reading stuff, and you can watch some of the films that go on." So there's a website, it's DCTP or at dctp.tv. It'll be in the show notes. I went on there. It was interesting. There was actually a live stream of stuff happening right at the top of the page. So that was cool to find out that it still lives, yeah, today, even post him being around, but also post its prime of being on television. So he was definitely one to keep up with the times because he talks a lot about how he was interested and had the boom of like YouTube and how people were able to create their own work and put it up on YouTube.
Hmm.
So he was very interested in making sure he kept up with modern styles of creating and showing films. And I highly recommend, just even if you don't watch anything, just to click on it because it's interesting. The layout of the website is very interesting. Feels
Yeah.
very 80s, but it's cool.
Eh, maybe it hasn't been updated since the 80s. You never know. But that's amazing that you can watch their live streams and such. I'll have to check that
Hmm.
out. We'd actually, a little behind the scenes, when we were thinking about films that we wanted to watch that we hadn't seen yet and trying to bookmark ones that might be interesting for this series, we had thought about Germany in Autumn because
Yes.
it's so many different German directors. It deals with issues that are relevant to Germany at the time. And then we both watched it and we're like, no, I don't think we want to do that one. So it just wasn't quite as
Yeah.
compelling as we were hoping, it would
No.
be to cover on the series for either of us. So yeah, that one, his segment, and then everybody essentially except Fassbinder and Schlendorf. I don't really, respond to what they were going for in a lot of ways in that film, but
Yeah.
that one is available and an interesting historical document for dealing with German Autumn, which was a period in 1977 where the Red Army faction essentially kidnapped a German industrialist, and they end up killing the industrialist. Several of the RAF that are in prison, the leading members are either commit suicide or are killed while they are in prison. A little bit unclear, but that season was a very fraught time politically for Germany, and so it covers that, and that is a very important to the history of Germany in the 70s. So interesting to see artists capture it really just a year later. I think Kluge's best film that I've seen is his next film after Yesterday Girl, which is Artists Under the Big Top Perplexed. It's pretty similar in style to this, but it's dealing with the circus. And
Hmm.
so the visual element of it and the things that he's trying to capture stylistically are just a lot more interesting because you've got more visual interest from watching circus performances going on. You got elephants all over the place. Very similar in trying to make economic points about, starting a business and how that might go wrong. And also a female lead character who is discriminated against. So capturing the same sort of thing from a slightly different angle, a little less well known than Yesterday Girl, but I thought it was a little bit better. So I really like that one and would recommend that folks check that out too. All
Nice.
right. We've got some double features prepared. We choose double features that are not from New German cinema itself. And I think we both swapped out our double
Yes.
feature for this week after the fact. So that's sort of funny. I had one that was really obvious, and then I chose one that was, I think, a little less obvious. So that I was the original one was Wanda, which is a film I love,
Yes.
but is a very obvious comp for this movie in that it also, as I was thinking about films that feature women and are looking at how they're treated by society, it's the most direct comp for what this is trying to do because the both Anita and Wanda in some ways are very like voiceless and are
Mhm.
not able to express exactly what they're feeling. I think Wanda is a far better film. I think it's really a masterpiece. It's a really
Yes.
incredible film, but both also open with, a courtroom scene that's pretty instrumental in understanding who the character is. So there are a lot of comps there, but that felt really obvious. So that's not the double feature that I chose. I'll let you go first with your actual double feature, Felicia.
It's funny because I feel like I went the opposite where my first one was less obvious, and I was like, I'll
Mm,
go for a more obvious one. So my
yeah.
original, I'll say, was My Night at Maud's, the Romer film.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's just visually, it reminded me a lot of it. As I
Yeah.
was watching it, for some reason, I was just getting My Night at Maud vibes. But then I eventually changed it, especially doing research. I was like, "Oh, okay, it reminds me also of, Godard." Vivre sa vie probably was better the choice, but I didn't think about that. I thought of La Chinoise, and just the
Mm,
way the editing style is in that film, and that one has a heavy-handed message that they're trying to get across in this
yeah.
film,
Yeah.
which I think is very reminiscent of what, he's doing in this film. So, I think if you wanna see a direct influence on, Kluge, you probably should watch a Godard. I don't know if I would necessarily probably even watch both of them back to back. You probably will feel
Mm,
exhausted after, but
that's fair.
if you're, like, in, like, academic mode, I would recommend those 2 as a double bill.
Yeah. For me, La Chinoise is one of Godard's hits that I really like.
I like it too.
It is a little bit more didactic, I guess, but I don't know, it just really works for me as well. So I think it's an excellent film and sort of a fun pairing here. Yeah, the Godard style is uh very prominent, of course, in Kluge. So I picked one eventually that was more of a historical and film history comp than a stylistic comp.
Okay.
So I thought of when we're talking about the Oberhausen Manifesto, the other
Mhm.
prominent film manifesto that the only other thing that I can think of that's been called a manifesto would be the Dogma 95 manifesto from the Lars von Trier, Thomas Vinterberg, and some other filmmakers who had a manifesto and a list of rules that all films who were made in the Dogma style needed to follow. So again, very, they announced this thing and this vision for films, and then there were many films made in that mode by Vinterberg and von Trier. Not all of their films follow all of those rules. In fact, von Trier's first film after the manifesto breaks a lot of the rules, so it's not
Yeah.
considered a dogma film, but he does make some that do follow all of the rules. But the first dogma film is Dogma 1 is The Celebration, which is a Vinterberg film, very, very different film, of course, than Yesterday Girl. But in terms of being a statement around what a movement is and like, this is what we are trying to do. And I really like The Celebration. It is a tough movie to watch, but I think it's
I
so
know.
good. Yeah. So I really like that one. It's actually probably my favorite of the Dogma, or I like it better than anything
Is
Von
it?
Trier's done. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
interesting. Actually,
yeah,
you know what? I think I need just bringing up Dogma 95, and I
yeah.
can't believe I didn't think about it. I think because it's so important that, people inspired, you know, uh, I have to assume this movement inspired them to create their own movement, and seeing what they were able to do. And yes, they moved on post that movement in their careers, but same with a lot of the directors did in this movement as well, where they were doing New German cinema and then they moved past it. But I have seen Celebration. I love Thomas Vinterberg. This movie stresses me out so much.
It's
I
very
was
stressful.
stressed the whole time. I was on edge. I couldn't even enjoy it. I think I require a second watch because I was like, um, it's a lot.
Usually, when I feel like a movie is intentionally trying to stress me out, I sort of not having a good time with it. But for
Hmm.
whatever reason, like this one, just really that like acid tinge, just it just really works for me for some
That's
reason. I
good.
can't really explain why it works and why a lot of the other movies that are trying to do that don't work for me, but I think it's because it's a little bit more of a satirical take on it and I really respond to
Mhm.
satire. And so that I think element of it works really well for me. But yeah, the celebration, Thomas Vinterberg. Maybe read a little bit about it before you watch it, but
I think so.
yeah, worth knowing what you're putting yourself in for.
Yes.
But in this case, but I would say worth watching. So
Yes. No, it is.
cool. Well, that about wraps it up for this week. This has been Cinema Field Guide. You can find us at cinemafieldguide.com, at Cinema Field Guide on many social media platforms. Where are we at, Felicia, on social media that people could check out?
We have the YouTube, so you can
Hmm.
find us at this. You can watch us speak about the film or you can listen to us in the background while the video plays.
You may
We're
be
also
watching us on YouTube right
right
now.
now.
Imagine
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah.
But obviously, we're on all streaming platforms, and we also have an Instagram. We have a Twitter, aka X, and we have a Blue Sky for right now. Those are the three that we have. Who knows? It might expand to further ones, but if you have any of those platforms, you can, follow us and keep up with what episodes are being released and what episodes are coming up in the series. So all of those things will be posted on there for you to find. And you
Yeah.
can also email us at cinemafieldguide@gmail.com.
Absolutely. Yep, we'll be announcing our next film for next week very shortly here. So be sure you're following along on social media for that. But yeah, this has been Cinema Field Guide, and have a great week.